Welcome back to No To Lashon Hara, day 53. The entire series is being done as a chut for the Refuah Shlema for Chana Bat Simefega. We just learned about the idea that in Lashon Hara, a person is allowed to listen to Lashon Hara, assuming they're not accepting that it's true, so long as they think that there's something constructive to be gained in order to protect themselves, in order to be able to not make a mistake in a business deal, in a shidduch, etc., etc. But the Chafetz Chaim asks an obvious question. In fact, it's impossible to know if something is going to be possible to be used constructively until you actually have heard it already. And by that time, if it was asur, then you've already committed the avera of listening to Lashon Hara. So how's a person supposed to figure this out? So the Chafetz Chaim says that really what a person is supposed to do is that when someone is gearing up and saying something to you which is negative, and you could always tell that someone's about to embark down that path. As an example, you say, I was hanging out with this guy, seems like a really nice guy. And the guy's like, seems like a really nice guy. You know what's coming next. The guy's about to spill the beans about why this fellow is not a nice guy or why you should stay far, far away from him. So at this point, you could stop the guy and say, listen, I know that you're going to tell me what you think about him, and it doesn't sound like it's so good. Do you think it's important that I have this information? And if the guy says, well, actually, that's really why I'm telling it to you, because I heard that you were going to do a deal with him. I heard that you were going to ask him for some information. I heard that you were going to trust his opinion of a business. And I just wanted you to know that he's a liar and he has no idea what he's talking about. And he does this just for kavod, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in that case, once the person has told you that Lashon Hara, as we said earlier, you're not allowed to accept it as fact because it's just Lashon Hara. There's no way to rely on just one person's negative report unless you have witnesses that something is true. But we can follow the rules that we said before, which is I can protect myself and not accept it as a fact. It may be or may not be true, but I wouldn't do business or I wouldn't get involved with someone that I was worried or was unsure about whether or not they were a honest businessman or a prospective good father-in-law or mother-in-law or wife. If it becomes clear as he is speaking that actually this has no constructive purpose to you, at that point that it becomes clear to you, you have to tell him, well, actually, I wasn't planning on getting involved with that girl. I wasn't planning on doing a business deal with this fellow. The person I was thinking about working with was his second cousin who has the same name, etc., etc. At that point, you have to say to the person, thank you very much. I don't feel like this is constructive for me to be listening to this report because it doesn't really have much to do with me. This leads us to another very interesting case about where the Chafetz Chaim says it's permitted for a person to listen to Lashon Hara. Let's get it exactly clear. Let's say something happened to someone's wife or husband and they feel very, very upset by something that someone's done to them and they're so angry, they're not dealing with it and they can't cope and they need to vent and they come to you. You're allowed to let your wife or husband unburden themselves, relate to you what happened. You have to tell yourself that my wife is very upset, my husband is very angry. It could be that they're not seeing things clearly, and therefore you're not allowed to accept that what they said is the absolute truth. And therefore, a primary goal in listening to the Lashon Hara that you're hearing from them about their boss or about their friend is actually to try and explain the situation in a different way, in a more positive light. And then she won't maybe be as angry, or maybe won't be as angry at that other person. And if that's the case, so then the listening to the Lashon Hara, assuming you're not going to be accepting it as fact, is actually for a constructive purpose, to bring shalom, either personal, make shalom with the situation, or with the other person, ideally, create shalom between them and the other person, maybe by explaining what they might have been thinking, or how they may have seen the situation, or comparing it to something where your spouse might be able to kind of relate to it without it being so emotionally triggering, etc., etc. Now, what if a person mistakenly listens to Lashon Hara? What if you didn't really realize, and then there's no good reason for me to do that, but it was a mistake, like we mentioned earlier. when someone may think that there's a constructive reason, they think that this is the person that they're actually trying to do business with, or they think that this is someone that they need to potentially protect themselves from, but then they find out that it's not. So now I've already heard this Lashon Hara, so what should I do with that Lashon Hara that I heard that I was not allowed to listen to? The Chafetz Chaim explains that what a person should do is try and find in your mind a way to judge the person favorably, and specifically saying it to the speaker and saying, well, the truth is, I sometimes do that too. I'm sure you do as well. Saying something like that, actually, you might convince the person who's speaking Lashon Hara that he may have made a mistaken judgment, and therefore he shouldn't feel that way towards the person who he's speaking about. And further, maybe he'll stop speaking Lashon Hara about that person, and maybe even go back and say, I think I misjudged you, and let things get out of hand. That would create a constructive purpose even after the fact. Along the same vein, the Chafetz Chaim gives us one more case. Imagine a friend comes to you and is really upset about something that happened, and you just ask him, wow, you seem a little shaken up, is everything okay? And the guy just launches right into a fantastic, juicy piece of Lashon Hara about what this person did to him and how they're a thief and how they take advantage and they're manipulative, etc., etc. Now, most friends in that situation think that being a good friend means, yeah, you're right, absolutely disgusting. This guy is a lowlife scum of the earth. And, launching into that maybe makes a friend feel like they're supporting their friend. But actually what will happen is, instead of that making the person feel better, it just adds fuel to the fire, because you now agree with him, and then he needs to go tell someone else, and then someone else, and then someone else. You may find a week later you walk past the conversation and he's still talking about the same thing with more people. What actually sometimes can help, and this is where the Chafetz Chaim is saying it would be allowed, is if you listen with empathy, but not with agreement. So in other words, you're not saying, yeah, he's terrible, yeah, absolutely, I would do the same thing, let's go burn his house down. Instead of getting the person angrier, that's what a Baal Lashon Hara does. He fans those flames, makes the flames hotter and bigger and stronger. Instead, you say, that stinks, wow, that must have been so upsetting, that must have been so difficult for you. You let the person feel that empathy, but instead of raising the temperature, you're actually just taking away the hurt by sharing, by sympathizing, by empathizing. And then when he's a little bit calmer, when the flames kind of die down a little bit, then maybe you can kind of start changing the conversation that's going on in his own mind. Remember, the baseline of Lashon Hara is to avoid machloket and avoid hatred and promote love and connection between Am Yisrael. So whether you're doing that by not speaking Lashon Hara or not listening to Lashon Hara, or in a situation where you listen to Lashon Hara, your purpose in listening to it is in order to bring Jews back together to solve or provide a little bit of healing in that hurt, then you're truly following in the ways of a person who's trying not to speak Lashon Hara.